What if I told you that the United States almost never owned Alaska? Imagine a world map where the largest state in America is still painted in Russian colors. Its icy mountains and endless forests ruled from a palace in St. Petersburg. It sounds impossible, but the truth is, the story behind how Alaska became American is far stranger and more dramatic than most people realize. This isn't just a tale of land changing hands. It's a saga filled with secret ambitions, desperate gambles, and decisions that would shape the future of two world powers. Most people know Alaska as the wild, frozen frontier, famous for its oil, gold, and untamed beauty. But few ever stop to ask how it ended up as part of the United States in the first place. Sure, we've all heard about the original 13 colonies and the steady march westward, but Alaska's journey into the American fold is a story that's often skipped over in history class. And that's a shame, because hidden in those icy landscapes are the echoes of a forgotten rivalry, a series of risky bets and a deal that almost never happened. So, why did Russia really give up such a massive, resource-rich territory? Was it just about money, or were there darker motives at play? And did the Americans truly understand what they were getting? Or did they just stumble into one of the luckiest deals in history? The answers aren't as simple as you might think. To uncover the real story, we have to go back to a time when Russia dreamed of building an empire across the Pacific, and the fate of Alaska hung in the balance. But before the sale, before the gold rush, and before the headlines, there was a secret ambition that set everything in motion. Long before Alaska became a bargaining chip between empires, it was the focus of Russia's secret ambitions in the New World. In the shadowy corners of the 17th century, Russian explorers gazed across the endless Siberian wilderness, wondering what lay beyond the frozen horizon. The idea of a land bridge or a hidden continent just out of reach was more than just a rumor. It was an obsession for the Russian crown. Driven by curiosity and the promise of untold riches, Tsar Peter the Great sent out daring expeditions to solve the mystery once and for all. The first to brave the unknown was Semyon Desnev, a name that rarely appears in history books but deserves a place among the world's great explorers. Desnev's journey was shrouded in uncertainty, with conflicting reports about what he actually found. Some say he glimpsed the distant shores of North America, while others claim his discoveries were lost in the chaos of the times. Either way, his silence only fueled the Russian government's determination to uncover the truth. Not willing to let the mystery go unsolved, Peter the Great ordered a new mission, this time led by Vitus Bering and Alexei Chirikov. These two men set sail into the unknown, braving storms, disease, and the ever-present threat of disaster. By the summer of 1741, both had reached the rugged coasts of Alaska, forever changing the course of history. Chirikov managed to return home with news of their discovery, but Bering's fate was far more tragic. Shipwrecked and stricken by illness, he died before ever seeing Russia again. Yet his crew brought back something that would ignite a frenzy back home: luxurious sea otter pelts. So valuable, they sparked a rush of traders eager to claim Alaska's riches. But the Russian dream of a new world wasn't just about adventure or profit. As traders set up posts along the Aleutian Islands, these outposts slowly grew into settlements, and the Russian presence became impossible to ignore. The native Alaskan people soon found themselves caught in the middle of a colonial power play, facing exploitation and violence as the Russians pushed for a fur-trading monopoly. The promise of wealth drove the settlers to expand their reach, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered and the seeds of future conflict were quietly being sown. And as Russia's grip tightened, the stage was set for a dramatic struggle over the fate of Alaska, a struggle that would soon spiral out of control. As Russian settlements took root along Alaska's wild coastline, the empire's ambitions grew bolder, and so did its appetite for profit. Enter the Russian-American Company, a powerful monopoly that would come to dominate the region's economy and politics. Backed by the Tsar himself, this company was supposed to transform Alaska into a jewel of the Russian crown, a place where fortunes could be made and Russia's influence could stretch across the Pacific. But behind the scenes, the reality was far messier, and the company's story quickly turned into one of greed, mismanagement, and whispered scandal. At first, the Russian-American Company seemed unstoppable. With exclusive rights to the fur trade, its agents set up new outposts, negotiated with foreign powers, and even established settlements as far south as California and Hawaii. The company's leaders dreamed of building a Russian empire in the Americas, but their ambitions were undercut by a series of costly mistakes. The settlements themselves were small and isolated, often home to just a few hundred Russians surrounded by vast, unfamiliar wilderness. Supplies were scarce. Communication with the Russian capital was painfully slow, and the harsh climate made every day a struggle for survival. But the real trouble started within the company's own ranks. Reports began to surface of corruption, incompetence, and outright theft. Some officials were accused of lining their own pockets while neglecting the needs of the settlers and the native Alaskans. Others made disastrous business decisions, squandering resources and alienating potential allies. Rumors swirled about secret deals, missing funds, and internal power struggles that threatened to tear the company apart from the inside. It's even been said that some of the company's leaders were more interested in personal gain than in building a lasting colony, leaving Alaska vulnerable to outside threats and internal collapse. Meanwhile, the company's aggressive push for a fur monopoly only deepened tensions with the native peoples. Forced labor, violent confrontations, and broken promises became all too common, fueling resentment and resistance. The dream of a thriving Russian Alaska was quickly fading, replaced by a harsh reality of dwindling profits and growing unrest. As the company's fortunes declined, so did Russia's hopes of holding on to its distant colony. And with every misstep, the stage was being set for a dramatic turning point, one that would force Russia to make a choice it never expected. By the time the 19th century rolled in, Russia's Alaskan experiment was teetering on the edge of disaster. The once promising settlements had shrunk to little more than isolated outposts, and the Russian-American company was bleeding money. But the real crisis was brewing thousands of miles away in the heart of Europe. The Crimean War erupted, dragging Russia into a costly conflict against Britain and its allies. Suddenly, the empire's attention and its resources were pulled in every direction, leaving Alaska more vulnerable than ever. The war was a wake-up call. Russian leaders realized just how exposed their North American colony truly was. Alaska sat on the far edge of the empire, separated by a vast ocean and surrounded by rivals. The British, with their powerful navy and their Canadian territories right next door, posed a constant threat. If war ever broke out in the region, defending Alaska would be nearly impossible. The cost of maintaining the colony, already a heavy burden, now seemed like a dangerous liability. Behind closed doors, Russian officials began to panic. The treasury was running dry, and the government was desperate to avoid another humiliating defeat. Whispers of secret meetings and backroom deals started to circulate. Some reports claim that high-ranking officials even considered abandoning Alaska altogether, fearing that it would fall into British hands if left unprotected. Others speculated that the Tsar's advisors were quietly searching for a way out, hoping to salvage what little value they could before disaster struck. Meanwhile, the Russian-American company was in freefall. Years of mismanagement and corruption had left it unable to turn a profit, and the settlers were growing restless. Supplies were running low, morale was at rock bottom, and the once lucrative fur trade was drying up. The company's leaders pleaded for help, but the government had bigger problems to worry about. With the empire's finances in shambles and the threat of British invasion looming, the idea of holding on to Alaska seemed less and less appealing. Desperation breeds bold decisions. Faced with mounting debts and the very real possibility of losing Alaska without compensation, Russian officials began to consider a radical solution: selling the territory to a foreign power. It was a risky move, one that could spark outrage at home and change the balance of power in North America forever. But with time running out and options dwindling, Russia was ready to gamble everything on a single dramatic deal. And as the world watched, the fate of Alaska hung by a thread. While Russia was scrambling to find a way out of its Alaskan dilemma, the United States was in the midst of its own era of ambition and uncertainty. The idea of expanding America's borders had always been a driving force, but the notion of buying a frozen wilderness from a distant empire seemed almost laughable to many. Yet behind the scenes, a handful of American visionaries saw something. Others didn't, a chance to secure the nation's future and outmaneuver its rivals in one bold stroke. One of the loudest voices for expansion was Secretary of State William Seward. Even before the Civil War, Seward had made it clear that he believed America's destiny lay in the far north and west. He famously declared that the country's population was destined to roll resistless waves to the ice barriers of the north, hinting at a future where the United States would stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific and beyond. But not everyone shared his enthusiasm. When rumors of a possible deal with Russia began to circulate, the American public and press erupted in ridicule. Newspapers mocked the idea, calling Alaska nothing more than Seward's folly or Seward's icebox, convinced that the government was about to waste millions on a barren wasteland. What most people didn't realize was that beneath Alaska's icy surface, a hidden fortune was waiting to be discovered. At the time, few could have predicted the gold rushes, oil booms, and strategic advantages that would eventually make Alaska one of the most valuable territories in the world. But for the politicians and speculators who paid attention, the potential was impossible to ignore. Reports of rich fur-bearing animals, untapped resources, and a prime location for trade and defense began to circulate among those in the know. Some even whispered that the Russians themselves were hiding the true value of the land, hoping to drive up the price or keep their rivals guessing. As negotiations dragged on, skepticism remained high on both sides of the Pacific. Russian officials worried about public backlash and the possibility of losing face, while American lawmakers debated whether the purchase was a brilliant investment or a colossal mistake. The press fanned the flames, publishing cartoons and editorials that mocked the deal and questioned the sanity of anyone who supported it. Yet, behind the noise, a small group of determined leaders pushed forward, convinced that Alaska could be the key to America's future greatness. Little did they know, the real jackpot was still to come. The gold rush that would sweep through Alaska at the end of the century was just a distant rumor, and the oil fields that would fuel America's rise were still hidden deep beneath the permafrost. For now, the deal was shrouded in controversy and doubt, with both nations wondering if they were making a historic blunder or seizing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And as the final negotiations approached, the world waited to see who would come out on top in this high-stakes game of empire and ambition. When it finally came time to strike a deal, the negotiations over Alaska were anything but straightforward. Behind closed doors, diplomats from both Russia and the United States engaged in a tense dance of offers, counter-offers, and secret calculations. The Russians, desperate to offload a territory they could no longer afford, were determined to get the best price possible without appearing weak on the world stage. Meanwhile, the Americans saw a rare opportunity to expand their influence, but they weren't about to be taken for fools. Every detail of the sale was scrutinized, every motive questioned, and every rumor dissected by politicians and the press alike. The final price tag, just $7.2 million for a landmass twice the size of Texas, seemed almost unbelievable. Some reports claim that Russian negotiators initially floated higher numbers, hoping to spark a bidding war or at least squeeze a bit more out of the Americans. But with the U.S. still recovering from the Civil War, money was tight, and public support for the purchase was lukewarm at best. Secretary of State Seward, however, was relentless. He saw the long-term value in Alaska and pushed the deal forward, even as critics called it reckless and absurd. Rumors swirled about what really happened behind the scenes. Some speculated that bribes and political favors greased the wheels of the agreement, with whispers of secret payments and backroom promises. Others suggested that certain American businessmen stood to gain from the deal, quietly buying up land and resources before the ink was even dry on the treaty. On the Russian side, there were accusations that officials had deliberately downplayed Alaska's potential, either out of ignorance or in hopes of avoiding further embarrassment if the territory was lost to the British instead. When the treaty was finally signed on March 30th, 1867, the reaction was anything but celebratory. Russian newspapers blasted the government for selling off a colony that had once promised so much, accusing leaders of squandering the empire's future for a quick financial fix. In the United States, the press mocked the purchase as a foolish gamble, with headlines dubbing Alaska Seward's icebox and Walrussia. Even many politicians who voted for the deal did so with reservations, unsure if they were making history or a costly mistake. Yet, beneath the surface, a handful of insiders recognized the magnitude of what had just happened. The transfer of Alaska was more than a simple land sale. It was a seismic shift in the balance of power, a move that would echo through the decades to come. And as the world tried to make sense of the deal, few could have predicted just how dramatically Alaska would transform the fortunes of the United States. But the real impact of the purchase was only beginning to unfold, and the next chapter would reveal just how wrong the skeptics had been. In the years that followed the ink drying on the Alaska purchase, the true value of this so-called icebox began to reveal itself in ways that stunned both critics and supporters. At first, Alaska seemed to live up to its reputation as a remote, frozen wilderness, with little to offer beyond endless forests and snow-capped mountains. But beneath that icy surface, a hidden world of riches was waiting to be discovered, and it wouldn't stay secret for long. The turning point came at the end of the 19th century, when whispers of gold in the Alaskan wilderness triggered a frenzy that would change the territory forever. The Klondike gold rush exploded almost overnight, drawing tens of thousands of fortune seekers from across the United States and beyond. Towns sprang up where there had once been only silence, and the rush for gold transformed Alaska from a forgotten outpost into a land of opportunity. Suddenly, the same politicians and journalists who had mocked the purchase were forced to eat their words as stories of newfound wealth flooded the headlines. But gold was just the beginning. As prospectors dug deeper, they uncovered vast reserves of oil, natural gas, and minerals, resources that would fuel America's growth for generations. Alaska's strategic location also became impossible to ignore. With its proximity to Russia and the Pacific, the territory offered the United States a powerful military advantage, especially as global tensions rose in the 20th century. During World War II and the Cold War, Alaska's air bases and radar stations became critical to national defense, turning what was once seen as a liability into a priceless asset. The economic impact was just as dramatic. Alaska's natural resources poured billions into the American economy, funding everything from infrastructure to education. The state's unique system of sharing oil revenues with residents through the Alaska Permanent Fund meant that ordinary people benefited directly from the land's hidden wealth. Taxes remained low, and the promise of opportunity drew new waves of settlers, entrepreneurs, and adventurers eager to stake their claim in the last frontier. Meanwhile, the native peoples of Alaska faced a new era of challenges and change. While some found relief in the end of Russian rule, the transition to American governance brought its own set of struggles, as traditional ways of life collided with the relentless march of progress. The story of Alaska became one of adaptation and resilience, as communities navigated the shifting tides of fortune and power. Looking back, it's clear that the Alaska purchase was far more than a simple real estate deal. It was a turning point that reshaped the destiny of two nations, unlocking a treasure trove of resources and opportunities that no one could have fully predicted. And as the world watched Alaska transform from a frozen afterthought into a cornerstone of American strength, the true magnitude of the deal finally came into focus. But even now, the question lingers. Was it a stroke of genius, or just a lucky accident? The answer, as always, depends on who you ask. So, was the sale of Alaska a colossal blunder for Russia, or was it the only move left on the table? Looking back, it's easy to judge the decision with the benefit of hindsight. Today, Alaska stands as a symbol of American fortune, a land bursting with oil, gold, and strategic power. But for the Russian Empire in the 1800s, the territory was a distant, costly outpost, draining resources and threatening to become a liability in the face of British aggression and mounting debt. The Tsar's advisors saw the writing on the wall. Holding on to Alaska could have meant disaster, both financially and militarily. Selling it to the United States wasn't just about quick cash. It was a calculated attempt to tip the balance of power, to keep Britain in check, and to salvage what they could from a failing colonial experiment. For the Americans, the purchase was a gamble that paid off in ways no one could have predicted. What started as a controversial deal, mocked by the press and doubted by politicians, turned into one of the greatest windfalls in U.S. history. Alaska's natural resources fueled economic booms, its location strengthened national defense, and its wild beauty captured the imagination of generations. The so-called icebox became a treasure chest, and the decision to buy it is now seen as a masterstroke of American diplomacy. But the story isn't just about winners and losers. The native peoples of Alaska experienced the change in power as a double-edged sword, relief from Russian rule, but also new challenges under American governance. Their voices, often lost in the grand narratives of empire and expansion, remind us that history is rarely as simple as it seems. The transfer of Alaska was not just a transaction between governments. It was a turning point that reshaped lives, cultures, and the very map of the world. And yet, the question lingers. What if Russia had held on? Would the Cold War have played out differently, with two superpowers staring each other down across the Bering Strait? Would Alaska's gold and oil have changed the fate of the Russian Empire, or would the territory have become an even greater burden as the world marched into the 20th century? These are the kinds of what-ifs that keep historians and dreamers alike up at night. In the end, the sale of Alaska is a reminder that history is full of unexpected twists, risky bets, and moments where the future hangs by a thread. Sometimes, the biggest decisions are made not with perfect foresight, but with a mix of desperation, ambition, and a little bit of luck. So next time you look at a map and see that massive stretch of land at the top of America, remember, it almost wasn't there. And the real story behind how it got there is stranger and more fascinating than most people ever realize. What do you think? Was it a mistake, a masterstroke, or just a lucky break? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below and keep exploring the hidden stories that shape our world.